fighting with YouTube right now. Yes. All right. Now I'm streaming. Hopefully still. Can you check and let me know if YouTube's not working? I'm sorry. My name is Freeman Michaels. I'm running for Congress in California's 52nd District as an independent, and I am streaming live on all of these little platforms here. Best place to find me, though, is to go to humanitarises.info and then click any of these social icons that you recognize. So I wanted to do this live stream because we talked about money and MMT yesterday, and I felt like there's a lot of things left unsaid. Let me first go back to I'm hearing echoes. Sorry, hold on, I got a little bit of an echo. Too many devices. So what we have is the definition. This is the Wikipedia definition. I don't know if this is the be-all, end-all, but what we really need to know is that MMT is just a macroeconomic theory, and my biggest fear is that people are trying to use the angst against bankers to then try and swoop in and get whatever power the central bank has. And if we look at the definition here, it's the macroeconomic theory that basically describes how our money is created. And for this one, not so much how our money is created, but how our money is managed and by whom. And this one, it's a national currency, and it's fiat money. Fiat money means it's not backed by anything. And we are basically backed by the full faith and credit of the United States and the people working for it, and that's us. And I don't really have a problem with that on the surface. It's really the propensity for corruption in the system that I have a problem with. And when people are talking about MMT like it's going to solve the problems, be careful what they're saying. If they may accurately depict a lot of the problems with the Federal Reserve, and who knows what's going on behind closed doors. I don't think Rand Paul or Ron Paul have ever actually been able to figure out what's going on, but I'm pretty sure that they're lending money to people that they probably shouldn't be, or just flat out giving it to them. But if you nationalize the currency, what that's doing is then saying, okay, well, there's going to be some new branch of office, most likely, and it's going to be administered by Congress, and they're going to control the money supply. And people feel like just because you can use the dollars conveniently to get around in your system, that what's the problem? The problem becomes when you look at the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50-year plans, when you've saved up a bunch of money for your retirement and all of a sudden the housing boom crashes. And there are a lot of factors at play that go on with stuff like that, but we really cannot let the bankers off of the hook with this, because oftentimes they are contracting the money supply, which makes I don't need to go through all the steps and whatnot, it's honestly not all that interesting. But when they contract the money supply, when they call in loans, or when they mess with the interest rate and whatnot, they have tons of different tools. What that does is that forces people who owe money, and maybe it's through a business or something, it forces them to scramble. So people pull money out of the stock market, people pull money out of Bitcoin, all because the banking system has contracted the money supply. And that is a large amount of power. Now, before I talk about why the nationalizing is a bad idea, let's talk about what a bad idea our current system has. Can you grab the Confessions of an Economic Hitman book?
Yeah.
It's right around there. And I think it sounds conspiratorial, but at the end of the day, it's follow the money. And if there is any financial incentive in this world to do something, there's going to be some jerk that's going to say, you know what, someone else will do it, I might as well do it. And I think that's where we are in this world. If you haven't, this is an old book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. When I first read it, I kind of thought it was pretty crazy conspiracy theory stuff. And if you haven't read it, what it's about is this guy, John Perkins, goes around to different countries, and I read it like a decade ago, so I don't really remember, but he goes around to different countries and tries to get them to, their governments, to invest in infrastructure, maybe your country needs some oil plant or some whatever. It doesn't even matter. It could be good infrastructure. But what happens is we fund it. We, the International Monetary Fund, not necessarily the Federal Reserve, but it doesn't really matter where it comes from because it's follow the money. What happens is there are financial interests that want entire countries, entire continents, entire planets to be in debt to them, and the only way that they can pay off that debt is through their token, their currency, and in our case, it's the dollar. And in this book, John Perkins goes around mostly to South American countries, from what I remember, and tries to convince world leaders through bribes and money and saying, hey, it's a good idea, your people need this investment. And these countries invest in these projects, but then can't really pay it back. And what that ends up being is, sure, you can buy off a few politicians and you can make a couple presidents happy and rich, but the people always get screwed, because then now the people are working to pay back for infrastructure that they may or may not have wanted, probably didn't need. They didn't build it themselves because our contractors came in and made money. And it's an entire racket. And this book, this guy wrote this book when he was retired from it. And he wrote this book ages ago. So this game has been being played for ages. You have to wonder why South America and Central America never really quite seem to become developed countries. Is it because the people suck, or they're different, or their DNA is different? No. It's because that the people at the bottom have been, they are, as Daniel likes to say, they're on the hamster wheel. And they keep chasing something that keeps getting further away. And you think you're making progress because maybe now you're making 30 grand a year or 50 grand a year or 100 grand a year, and you're really not advancing. None of us are. And that's the problem with having a centralized currency that is controlled behind the shadows, because you think you're making more money, but at the end of the day, are you really moving forward? If you look at how we were 40 years ago, this is my frame of reference because I'm 44, access to healthcare wasn't this expensive and wasn't this difficult, and it was barely a topic. And I get it, I was younger, and without the internet, it's really hard to say what the Reefer Madness media was telling you is true. But I don't remember people struggling to get healthcare this much. I don't remember homelessness being this much of a problem. And I remember downtown wasn't completely developed, and I'm not unaware of that, but problems have gotten worse. And when you look at the macro, the bigger picture, you can see that the wealth has been removed from the average person, and it is now in the hands of banks. And if the banks aren't the ones that are printing the money, they're certainly very close to the institutions that are printing the money. So now you have an entire population that is in debt and working to pay off a token, an instrument that represents your labor. In the United States, it's the dollar. And you're paying off this debt for people who print that money. What that really means is that they are controlling the value of your wealth, and they are heavily influencing how much wealth is in society in general. And you look at how much wealth we've had in the last 40 years. Healthcare is more expensive. Now we have tons of student loans. People used to not come out of college in debt. I came out in maybe $10,000 or $11,000 in debt. It wasn't that bad. But it's been getting worse, and education has been getting ridiculously more expensive, and conservatives are blaming it that it's not the free market, and progressives are blaming that it's not enough money in the system. And there is some truth to both. It's not the free market, so there's no real good supply and demand. There's nothing keeping it in check. But seriously, how much corruption do we need to see in our government before we stop trusting all of them? Look at what the Democrats have done. These people are supposed to be on their side. I don't give Republicans any pass. I mean, they're worse than the Democrats. Republicans basically tell you they're going to screw you, and you're like, okay, and then they do. And you're like, well, they told us. For me, that's kind of how I view the Republican Party. But the Democrats are supposed to be the party of the people. And I'm not a huge fan of single payer anymore because of that corruption. But if you are the party of the people, and if you're out promoting single payer, you shouldn't be the party when you have a supermajority in California that blocks it. And I'm talking about bill, I think it's SB 562. It's not even all that relevant to me. People are all surprised when the Democrats do what they are financially incentivized to do. And that is not help the people. And again, this is not just the Democrats. Think about what the Republicans did, and I'll get back to money in a second. Think about what the Republicans did in 2000 to 2002. I think they had Congress, they had the executive branch, and they had Supreme Court. And I think they even had a filibuster-proof majority in Congress. Did they even touch abortion? Of course not. They could have done something with it. That was their holy grail. Let's do something about abortion. But they didn't touch it because there's no financial incentive for any of these clowns to solve the problems. And so I don't know how anyone could trust either of those parties because they are clearly not on our side. And if you don't trust the people administering the government, then you have to look at what the government's doing. What is the FBI doing? Do we really trust them at this point? It doesn't matter what side you're on. Everyone's looking at the FBI and saying, WTF? Like, why don't you guys just tell? I can't imagine the people at Judicial Watch, the patience those guys have. They're like, well, he filed another lawsuit trying to get more information from the FBI. And then they get the information back and it's all redacted. Or like, oops, we forgot a missing page. It's so ridiculous. And it's such a dumb game. So there's the FBI. And then there's the people who the FBI sort of report to, the Department of Justice. Well, the head of the Department of Justice, Loretta Lynch, met with Bill Clinton privately on a plane while her wife was under criminal investigation from the FBI. So this is the FBI's boss talking to the husband of someone who's under investigation with the FBI. And then we find out through, I believe this was Judicial Watch, I don't think it was WikiLeaks, they released the text messages from the FBI around the exchange of the Loretta Lynch, Bill Clinton tarmac meeting. That's when the DOJ met with Hillary Clinton's husband. And the texts were only really concerned with whether or not information was going to get leaked. They were not concerned about the fact that the investigation might look bad or that the investigation actually might get tarnished. So these are the people that when people are talking about MMT and they want to nationalize the currency or hint at nationalizing the currency, these are the people that they're going to replace the Fed with. I don't think that's an improvement. I think we're just kind of changing the decks on the Titanic and saying, well, probably not going to sink now. Yeah, we are sinking. We're 20 trillion in debt. Even if you've paid off everything and you have no debts in your life, you still owe, I can't remember the numbers, $45,000 or $65,000. That's every man, woman, and child. And we owe it to the people who are printing this money. And that is, I honestly can't think of a more enslaving thing than to chase these tokens that someone else is constantly moving away from you. At the same time, those are people in cahoots with the two political parties. And all they do is fundraise. All they do is brag about how many of these stupid tokens they've raised because somehow that validates your idea. And I think it's time that we start to look up. So when people say you need to learn MMT, yes, I think you should. But if people are going to act like that's going to solve our problems, I don't think it is. I think we still have that problem where there's a top-down authority, and whether or not it's run by Congress, the FBI, the Federal Reserve, unless it's open source and unless you really know what these people want, I don't think it's a good idea. Now, let me go back to the Federal Reserve because that book that I brought up, John Perkins,
Hold it closer to the camera.
Okay. So these are the people, these bankers, the IMF, World Bank, they're all part of the same cartel. And I don't say cartel as in like a bad thing. It's just that they all have common interests. And in the Federal Reserve right now, remember that they bailed out their banker buddies because they were too big to fail. And whether or not there was some that was a loan that they paid back with interest that they earned, we talked about that. And there's all sorts of tricks and tips. But what happens when they print this money? It's not printed, it's digitally created, but that doesn't matter. What happens when they create this money is that the amount of wealth in the United States remains the same. You have your house, you have your carrots that you can buy across the street, whatever it is that the wealth of the United States, that remains the same. But when money, these tokens that we're all chasing, is created and given to someone else, Now all of a sudden they have, as a percentage, they have more power than you do. And that is effectively saying that the central bank, the same people who are trying to enslave other countries around the world, are running our currency, and they are intentionally not giving it to people who could help the community. I've said before that if you are a billionaire and the community around you, and you're not trying to make the community around you a better place, that it's fair to question your motives. And I think that is fair. I think a lot of times people just don't know how to solve the problems. And that's okay. I can buy that. If you're a billionaire, you probably live in a different circle. I get it. But if you print money and your goal isn't to make more money, your goal is only to increase power, that's really the opposite of what humanity in general want. When they increase power, where do you think that power comes from? It comes from you. And it shows up, it's so slight and it's so subtle that over 40 years, all of a sudden, we're paying off student loans. We never used to do that before. And all of a sudden, you have to have two people working. That's just an assumption. And you still don't have that much stuff. No one really feels safe and secure in this society. I'm not talking about necessarily guns and violence, but pure security where you know you're going to have food, you know you're going to have healthcare, and you know these things aren't going to be a battle and a fight. I don't think we have that at all in capitalism and this top-down governments. So that is, I just had to get that off my chest with the Federal Reserve and MMT. And this, I'm going to talk about cryptocurrency a little bit. And this is why cryptocurrency is so interesting. And for the record, I don't think it's there yet. I think there's a lot of work to be done. I don't quite know why some of it's not done. I would have to guess that there is some corruption, and there's a lot of people, a lot of money people who do not want cryptocurrency to be created and take off. Why? Because, because it takes away all the power and all the games that they play. There are so many games, God knows how many games they play, but they take away the cryptocurrency, and if people start chasing those tokens instead of dollars or euros, they take away any power that the central authority has when they are printing, creating this currency or giving it to their buddies and whatnot. Because right now, wealth is basically represented by dollars in the United States, and the federal government, which is not part of the Federal Reserve and is not part of the dollar, validates that. And that now becomes a massive power shift for anyone who is in control of these tokens, and that's the dollar. So why does cryptocurrency become super interesting here? Let's talk about Bitcoin specifically. I'm not going to talk about Dogecoin. I do have some Dogecoin. It's a total joke, but why not? I mean, their mascot's a dog, so I'll buy that. But Bitcoin is interesting because it has some of the natural characteristics of a currency. And there are generally three things. See if I can pull these off the top of my head. It has to be divisible and reuniting. So that's kind of like gold. You can melt it down and put it back together. And that's important because you can't just buy everything with $100. You need to be able to divide it up. It has to be shiny, has to have some digital shine. So gold and silver historically have had that value because they don't rust and they are technically and literally shiny. And it has to be something that people want, and that's the shine part. And it has to be rare, because if it's not rare, then what's the point? Everyone will have it. The tokens have to be rare because they are, or the dollars or the currency, because they are representing something that you are going to want in the future. You've done this labor, and then you're going to store that wealth of the labor. If you store that wealth in something, say, like a Bitcoin, if a Bitcoin continues to have value in the future because everyone likes the digital shine and everyone likes the fact that the Federal Reserve can't print a bunch more Bitcoins, and it's going to have that natural barrier, and it's divisible. You can send someone 1 penny's worth of a Bitcoin. That has the capacity to be a storage of wealth, not necessarily means of exchange, because Bitcoin's not ready yet. It's too cumbersome to do stuff, and that's why you have Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash and all that other stuff, and Ethereum is a different thing. But just to be able to store your wealth where central bankers and the World Bank. For a second, that they won't try and mess with cryptocurrencies. I'm sure they are. But they can't control cryptocurrency as much because it is open. And that's one of the nice things about the cooperative economy. I'm not going to go on to that a little bit. But the open source nature of it, or at least the open nature of it, makes corruption that much more difficult. If you show a crowd of people that you handed someone $100, there's no way you can really convince that crowd that you didn't do it. They all saw you do it. And that's kind of like the blockchain with cryptocurrency. And that becomes very important when central bankers can no longer rob the wealth of a community, or central bankers can no longer work with the federal government to automatically siphon off your wages through income tax. And this is not like an anti-income tax thing. I think it's kind of BS, but at the same time, there's a reason why we have it. And I'm not advocating just letting the government fall apart. I think that we want to do this in a peaceful transition. But people really need to know that if someone is pushing MMT as an excuse to nationalize it, run for the hills, because they're telling you that they want Congress to run your money supply. And I don't know that that's better than these greedy Fs at the Federal Reserve. And granted, they are greedy, but we know what they're doing. It's obvious. They're trying to steal the wealth from the population. I think that's kind of what I had on my chest. Is there stuff that yeah. All right. I had to get that out. Thank you for listening. Money is a crazy topic. I think we're going to talk more about this, and I think that this is absolutely an interesting time to be alive, and this is going to be an exciting time to be alive. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will talk to you later.